Good morning. If you're here with us for the first time or you're joining online with us for the first time, we're beginning a new series on marriage. And I pray these messages would not open up old wounds, but we'd look at Scripture and we look to the Lord and find some biblical principles that would make any relationship, any marriage, flourish. Through the congregation's support and through the leadership of the church, Cornerstone is willing to provide counseling services for the congregation for their needs in their marriage or in their personal relationship. We have a agreement with Family of Hands Counseling in Danville, Virginia, to pay for your first 3 visits, your intake, your first 3 visits to that agency to receive counseling if you're having trouble in your marriage or you're having trouble in your personal life. So you might be saying, I wonder if counseling would help me in my marriage. If you're asking yourself that question, the answer is yes, it will help you. If you're struggling with depression or anxiety, or you're having issues with addiction, and you're wondering if counseling would help, the answer is yes, it will help. And so, because of the generosity of the church, the leadership of the church, we're making this available to people who are part of this family. And we want you to take advantage of it if it can help. We've prayed for 2.5 years now that the Lord would break the chains of addiction and dysfunction in families and individuals and give them new life. And so this is part of that effort. Now, if you're one of the individuals, you're in a solid relationship or you're not in need of counseling service, but you have some means to provide that these services continue, you can make a gift to the Joy Box so that these opportunities are available to people who need them. If you'd like to find out more about this, just fill out a Connect card and say, I'm interested in the counseling services, or fill out an online Connect card and we'll reach back to you. Make sure you give us some information that we can reach back to you. But we're wanting to help people have good marriages, good relationships, that their families would be healthy and flourish, and that's no easy task. So, Tim Keller wrote, he said, marriage does not so much bring you into confrontation with your spouse as confront you with yourself. It's really true. To really know ourselves, we must be known by others. People who are our friends or our spouse or in a small group. People who reflect back to us what they see in us. People, what they reflect back to us, what they hear. I mean, this is how we know who we are. You can't know yourself in isolation. You really have to be known by others to be fully known by yourself. And so marriage and friendships and small groups can create that opportunity. But confronting yourself is painfully necessary, but absolutely necessary for growth. It is hard to confront ourselves. It was through marriage I found out how selfish an individual I am. I can't find that out living on an island somewhere. I have to find that out by having to sacrifice and lay down my rights each and every day. And so when it comes to marriage, everyone has been dragging a suitcase around their entire life. And things have been put in that. Either you put them in or someone else put them in for you. And then when you come into marriage, you start unpacking that. And some of the things that come out of that suitcase are not very nice to look at. But yet it's necessary to unpack these things. Now, sometimes when these things are unpacked, a marriage blows up, and the temptation is to get out of the marriage. Many couples jump ship too early. They fall prey to what's called the divorce assumptions, when your spouse is the source of your unhappiness. And it seems obvious that getting away from them will solve the problem. We assume that it will improve our quality of life. This conclusion often leads to separation. Separation leads to divorce. And evidence shows, however, that divorce seldom leads to the happiness that we hope for. Now, I've been through divorce. So these words that I'm speaking today do not come from some lofty mountain of superiority. Rather, they're spoken from the dark valley of walking through divorce, which is hard. God's Word gives legitimate reasons for vows to be broken, but just as marriage should not be entered lightly, ending a marriage should be a last resort. A team of leading family scholars did an interesting study where they compared marriages and couples and the difficulties that they were going through. Now, in this group of couples that they were surveying, some opted for divorce and ended their marriage, others did not. After 5 years, they were all interviewed again, and amazingly, they found no evidence that those who divorced were any happier than those who stayed married. In fact, 2/3 of those unhappily married spouses who stayed married found their marriages improved, and 8 out of 10 avoided divorce were happily married 5 years later. It's hard to love someone. Just ask God, right? I mean, when you choose to love someone that's hard to love, you're imitating God's love for all humanity. You might have heard of this Bible verse before, but God showed His great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners, right? Jesus, the husband of the church, died for an undeserving bride, died for a rebellious bride. This is the husband of the church. And so God created and designed marriage to be a reflection of His love for humanity. Now, this is why it's so hard to love others, because let's just face it. Can you admit it? You don't have to say this out loud, but say to yourself, I'm hard to love sometimes. It's true. It's really true. Paul wrote in Ephesians 5, he said, as the Scriptures say, a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife. The two are united into one. This is a great mystery, but it is an illustration of the way Christ and the church are one. So again, I say, each man must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. We care about marriages at this church because we care about people. We also care about marriages because we care about God's reputation. Because marriages are a reflection of God's love for humanity. And so, when a broken marriage is restored by generous grace and sacrificial love, God is glorified, and everyone who knows that story is encouraged and amazed that that could actually happen, a marriage restored from complete destruction. So grace is unmerited favor. The Hebrew version of the word grace can be defined this way: happy to stoop down. And I know all of you are happy to stoop down in front of the other. I'm going to, as I exit today, I'm going to take my shoes off and let one of y'all wash my feet, because you're going to be happy to do it, right? No, I'm not really going to do that. You don't want to wash my feet. But I'm illustrating that, like, this is what I'm trying to say is this doesn't come naturally. We need supernatural help to stoop down in front of another. Like, this is a Christ-like quality that's developed in us as we keep our focus on Jesus. Philip Yancey wrote this. He said, while other religions offers a way to earn approval, only Christianity dares to make God's love unconditional. I mean, this is what sets Christianity apart from other religions, is this word grace. There was a group of scholars from Oxford many years ago who were having this conversation about what's the one characteristic or characteristics that make Christianity different from other religions. And one of the professors said, it's a creation story. One of them said, well, it's the story of the cross. Then C.S. Lewis, who was an Oxford professor, came walking into the room, and they asked him, what makes Christianity different from other religions? And he said, oh, that's easy. It's one word: grace. It's grace. And grace is what keeps a marriage together, especially a marriage that's going through really difficult times. So God is happy to give unmerited favor, grace, to all who ask for it, but you gotta ask. You gotta humble yourself and ask. You can't just think He's going to do that because He made you. He wants you to come to Him and depend upon Him and seek Him. in season 4 of The Chosen is a dramatization of the life of Jesus. And there's several seasons out there. Season 4 has just been released, not long ago. And in one of those episodes, Peter is having a hard time forgiving Matthew. You see, before Matthew started following Jesus, he was a tax collector. He was a sellout, a backstabber to the Jewish people. And Peter couldn't stand him. And when Jesus calls him to follow him, Peter's angry because he was a tax collector. Jesus preaches this Sermon on the Mount where it says, love your enemies, and Peter's struggling with all this forgiveness talk that Jesus lays out. So he comes in the scene, he comes to Jesus privately, and he asks him this question. He says, Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times? I mean, Peter thought he was being generous. The rabbis of that day, they taught 3 times. If somebody offends you 3 times, you forgive them, but the 4th time, nope, you're not required. So Peter doubles that and adds 1, and he thinks he's above the bar. I love Jesus' response. Here's what Jesus says, no, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. In other words, forgiveness is like an unending waterfall into other people's lives. It's a relationship principle to live by. It's not a number. And so Peter, like us, needs further explanation to such big principles. So he tells a parable, as Jesus often does. Jesus says, therefore the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king who decided to bring his accounts up to date with the servants who had borrowed money from him. In the process, one of his debtors was brought to him and owed him millions of dollars. He couldn't pay, so his master ordered he be sold along with his wife, his children, and everything he owed to pay the debt. Jesus says there's this man who had an impossible debt, and that debt was going to destroy his life, his wife's life, and his children's life. He had no hope. 10 lifetimes couldn't pay back this debt. That's our debt to God. Now, I know some of y'all, especially younger ones, are just young and beautiful and, so kind and so loving. It's hard to imagine that you have a debt owed to God that you can't pay, but it's true. And the longer you live, the more you know this, that we owe God a debt we can't pay. We cannot save ourselves. You can be a really nice person, pay all your debts and all your taxes, but it won't save you. Only Jesus can save us from the sin debt we owe God. And so Jesus continues this parable with an unheard of action by the master. But the man fell down before his master and begged him, please be patient with me and I'll pay it all. Then the master was filled with pity for him and released him and forgave his debt. The master demonstrates this incredible act of grace. What a beautiful story. But wait, there's more. But when the man left the king, he went to his fellow servant and owed him a few $1,000s. He grabbed him by the throat and he demanded instant payment. His fellow servant fell down before him and begged him for a little more time. Be patient with me and I will pay it, he pleaded. But his creditor wouldn't wait. He had the man arrested, put in prison until he could pay his debt in full. How can someone who's been forgiven so much be so unforgiving to someone who owes him so little? Well, that's not hard to imagine. I mean, we come to church, we come to this moment, the apex of our service we call communion, and we contemplate the forgiveness that we receive, the grace that we have in Jesus, the wonderful blessings that He's given us, and we truly worship the Lord. And then we go home. Or maybe it's on the ride home. And suddenly we're not so forgiving. Maybe we get angry because someone didn't move the laundry from the washer to the dryer. Or maybe we get angry because the lights were left on, or because there's a fender bender, or because something was left undone. And suddenly we're not so forgiving. We're just, I know everybody's squirming, there's elbows flying. I mean, I know right now all of us are experiencing this like, okay, I'm that guy. And that's good. That's why Jesus tells parables, so we can see ourselves in them. And so it's hard to imagine, but it's not really that hard to imagine, is it? But wait, there's more. When some of the other servants saw this, they were upset. They went to the king and they told him everything that had happened. The king called in the man he had forgiven and said, "You evil servant, I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had mercy on you?" Then the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he had paid his entire debt, which means forever. He's never getting out. That's what my heavenly Father will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from the heart. So don't miss this. A couple truths we should reinforce is God freely forgives us, so we are to freely forgive others. Aren't you glad you came to church today? The failure to forgive someone who is repentant casts doubt on our salvation. And thirdly, the refusal to forgive others will be reflected in God's mercy towards us on the judgment day. Forgiving someone who really hurt you may be the most difficult thing you ever do, but it may be the most Christ-like thing that you ever do. And Jesus leaves us no option but to forgive those who have wronged us. Reconciliation is different than forgiveness. We're not talking about reconciliation day. Hopefully that's what happens. But we can forgive because forgiveness is between you and God. It might result in reconciliation, which we hope it does. But if we've received grace, we must extend grace. That is how it works. Now, this does not remove the reality of what you are owed in restitution. You may be owed an apology. You might be owed a marriage. You might be owed something that can never really be paid back because of what was taken. But don't let it destroy your life. Unforgiveness, I mean. Don't let it rob you of the peace that you can have in this life or eternal life with God. Grace, you see, and forgiveness creates the only path forward. If we rehearse over and over again the sins of the past, we're going to be stuck in a cycle of sadness and confusion. The only way to move forward from past sins, no matter how big they are, is to show grace and offer forgiveness. So many people are stuck in unforgiveness. They rehearse the bitterness and the problems of the past, but it will bury you, and you can never get out. John Gottman has wrote the Bible on relationships, really has. He's studied relationships for more than 50 years. At the University of Washington, they actually have a research center where they have couples come in, and they live in these, they're labs, but they look like a home, where they're watching them interact with one another, recording all kinds of biometric type, things. And so after 50 years of research, he's produced some of the best information on healthy relationships. And he also has produced what he calls the four horsemen of the apocalypse. In other words, he says there are four indicators of why a marriage will end in divorce. And he calls them the four horsemen of the apocalypse because if you know the biblical metaphor, these are the things that depict the end times, and they're plagues, right? And so I'm going to walk through these quickly, and then I'm also going to walk through quickly his solution of how to deal with that. And what you'll see in each problem, there are four of them, what you'll see in each problem is how they lack grace. And I want you to look how they lack grace. Number one is criticism, an attack on character or personality. It's when you're looking at that individual and say, you're stupid, you're lazy, you're selfish. These are attacks on that individual's identity. And he offers a solution, or the antidote to criticism is to talk about your feelings using I statements and then express a positive need. For example, rather than screaming or yelling at some individual, your spouse, because they didn't notify you that they were going to be late, you could say something like this. Honey, when you know you're going to be late, I would appreciate a text or a call letting me know that that's going to happen, because when you don't, I feel unappreciated. I don't feel important. You can say things like that, and it'll go much further into resolving whatever problem there is. Second horse of the apocalypse, is contempt, mean words and behaviors to try and make the other person feel worthless. Contempt is an expression of superiority that comes through as sarcasm or cynicism or name-calling or eye-rolling or huffing, hostile humor, mockery. I see heads moving. I know we've probably all been, done some of this, right? Contempt, listen, contempt is the greatest predictor of relationship failure. When we bear contempt, the root of bitterness towards another person, that relationship, that marriage is headed to divorce. Contempt is fueled by long, simmering negative thoughts. The antidote to contempt is to treat one another with respect and build a culture of appreciation within the relationship. This is how we work through that. Defensiveness, victimizing yourself to evade responsibility or reverse blame. America has become professionals in becoming victims. Everybody's a victim, right? Because no one wants to bear the responsibility of the actions that they've committed. Typically, defensiveness is a response to criticism. When we feel unjustly accused, we fish for excuses to play the innocent victim so the other person will back off. Our excuses just tell the other person that we're really not hearing their concerns. We're really not listening to the problem. It's serious to them. Defensiveness never solves the problem. It's just an underhanded way to blame your partner. The antidote to defensiveness is to accept whatever responsibility is yours, even if it's just a small part. I get it. I hear what you're saying. The fourth horseman is stonewalling, withdrawing to avoid a conflict. Stonewalling occurs when a person withdraws without any desire to resolve the conflict. The antidote to stonewalling is to take a break for a few minutes, take a break for 20 minutes if you need it, and then calm down and return to the conversation. And Gottman, he shares these principles, these antidotes to resolving these problems, but without grace, I think it's impossible. Grace is a secret sauce to any great relationship, any great marriage. And stonewalling and defensiveness and contempt and criticism, it obstructs our vision, our view of another person. We really can't see them when we're using these types of tactics in relationships, whether we're knowingly doing that or unknowingly doing that. It's like a person that has cataracts. So the photo on the left is vision-free from cataract impairment. The one on the right is one that's impaired by a cataract. And so no one, wants to walk around not seeing truly the world or the other individual. But when we hold up someone's faults constantly, every time we see them, every time we interact with them, we're holding up this flaw of them or what they've done wrong to us. We truly can't see who they are. Grace, you see, gives us true vision of that individual. It doesn't erase the problem, but it gives us a clearer opportunity to see them as they are. Now, practically, how do we see someone clearly? So here's a few suggestions. I will overlook the small things, right? Proverbs 19:1 says, it's to one's glory to overlook an offense. Now, to overlook doesn't mean you don't notice it, right? It might be there, but you're not going to call attention to it. This is a bewitching thing I'm about to hold up to you. It's my wife's magnifying mirror, all right? Now, one side is just normal, but one side is, everything is, it's like you're looking at, I'm an old, ugly man. I'm going to tell you that right now. I mean, when I look at this thing right here, my blemishes look like erupting volcanoes, right? The wrinkles in my face look like great valleys. My nose hairs. The black forests of Germany, right? I mean, I don't know why anyone would have one of these things, but they exist. And And this is what happens when we begin to focus on someone's problems. It distorts our view of them. It's easy to focus on faults. Are you one of those individuals when you talk about life, it's always to the negative? It's always what's wrong in politics, or what's wrong in the world, or what's wrong in the economy, or what's wrong. The Bible coaches us in that. It says, think about things that are uplifting. Think about things that are good and not evil, right? And so, it's so important that we look for the opportunity of grace in a relationship. Overlook the small things. Next, I will choose to remember the good things. 1 Corinthians 13:5 says, love keeps no record of wrongs. Research shows that couples who recount the positive things in their past have a hopeful future. It really is true. That doesn't mean that there aren't negative things in their history. It simply means that they choose to dwell on the positive things. Move past old wounds. Isn't that how God looks at us? I think many of us have learned to forgive, but it's hard to forget, right? So don't say this, but I think sometimes this is what happens. Honey, I've forgiven and I've forgotten your wrongs, but I'm just reminding you of what I've forgiven you of. Like, don't do that. Like, that's not fair, right? We try to forget it like God. We try to move it from as far as the east to the west. By the grace of God, we truly can forgive past wrongs because we know that's how God sees us. We believe that. Next, I will share one encouraging comment daily. So this is your homework assignment. It's on the bottom of your bulletin there. You're supposed to do this before the end of the day. Whether you're married or not married, try to share one positive comment with someone today because treating others proactively is the way we want to be treated, and everyone needs a sincere word of encouragement. So this week, if you go through the drive-through window, thank your server with a smile. Thank you for that $6 hamburger that used to be $1, whatever. When you go to pick up your child today at Nursery or Kingdom Kids, sincerely thank the individual who's been working with them. Say, thank you for investing your life in my family's life, because that's what they're doing. They're investing their life in your children's life. Tonight, before you go to bed, tell your spouse one positive thing about who they are and make a practice of that. Make a practice of that. Anne Frank said, no one has become poor by giving. Finally, seeing someone clearly requires to forgive the big things. In the parable that we read by Jesus in Matthew 18, a master was filled with pity, and he released him and forgave him of his debt. Marriage can produce such deep sentiment of love. They're like the video opening, there are high highs and there are low lows. And when those lows hit, it can seem impossible to forgive and get past. But only a grace-based marriage, I think, can do that, can forgive the biggest wrongs. The next story you're going to watch is by Al and Lisa Robinson, part of their life. They're part of the Robinson family, the Duck Dynasty family, and it's just an amazing testimony of God's generous grace working in a marriage.
So the worst part of your wife cheating on you is that you think you're going crazy. There's something inside you that you know is not right, but you can't figure it out. First thing you notice are the gaps of time. Where were you? I was literally going insane. But then I found this person's name in her purse, and I'm just like, why is this here? Then I just broke. I just thought, well, you know what? You're judgmental. You're the problem. You're making these accusations against your wife. Obviously, if she were doing this, she would have told us. She would have told the truth. Another voice says, how can you preach and teach when you've got this going on in your own house? So then it became my problem. Just this constant trial that's going on inside my head. And sometimes you're the prosecutor, sometimes you're the defender. It was 14 months of this. We went to a football game, so it was a Friday night. The whole time I'm just like silent, you know, and so she's feeling that radiating from me, and she knew something was different.
So we get back home, we put our girls to bed, and then bam, he says, I know what's happening, I know what's going on, and I need you to tell me about it.
This starts at 9 or 10 at night. So we're 2 or 3 a.m., and I'm still just like, truth, truth, truth. And so she starts to break, and she's like, if I tell you the truth, you'll leave me, that we'll be over it. And so finally she said it. Yes, I've been having an affair. And so then after that, my initial moment when she said the words, and this sounds crazy to me now, it was relief. And now it's like, okay, I don't want you here. I don't want you in this house. I want you still in the kid's life. I'm not making any hard decisions about anything tonight, but I just know I don't want you here. And so she left.
I just say, I am not doing anything. I mean, what are you talking about? He proceeds to tell me, I have the phone records, and I need you to be honest and tell me. I had not been honest for a very long time, since I was a young child. And for me to be totally honest was to give up a part of myself, because I was admitting that I was not who everybody thought I was. I said, if I tell you this, you're not ever going to want to have anything to do with me. You're going to ask me to leave. You're going to divorce me. And he said, if you're not honest with me, I'm going to divorce you anyway. And so I said, it's all true. It's probably a lot worse than what you think. And so he said, okay, that's it. I need you to leave. I was just like, I know God's been prodding me to tell the truth. Why would he prod me to tell the truth if I'm losing everything? I realized at that point that I had no relationship with God, that I did not know who God was. I started going to a counselor.
Then I got to this crossroads.
And I was able to be honest.
Okay, if I say the words, how do I really mean it?
What I finally realized is whenever I married Alan, I would have done anything to marry him. And he pretty much became my God whenever I married him.
So I had a very deep conversation with the Almighty.
At this point, I dethroned him, and I put the real Lord of my life in the position that he needed to be.
I said, will you reveal to me any inkling of any untruth? If she's ever going down this road again, will you reveal it to me? If you can assure me that that will happen, I feel like I can extend forgiveness and mean it.
Finally, for the first time in my life, Jesus Christ was the Lord of my life. I was now an honest person, and I had not ever been honest before.
And then I told her the words. I said the words. I said, I forgive you, and I love you. And we want to spend the rest of our lives doing what we missed out on. And of course, she said, I'm so sorry for what I put you through. And I said, well, I know. That's why it's going to be a journey. It's going to be a hard one, but we can do this.
There was a time in my life that I didn't even know that I would have daughters and granddaughters. I never could have seen myself as a wife, as a mother, as a grandmother. Our lives are just so different because we chose to fight through our marriage and to fight for our marriage.
Our relationship with Jesus Christ has helped us realize that through doubt, through fear, through worry, through pain, through difficulty, through brokenness, that you can be renewed.
Even in our bad marriage, all things are possible through Jesus Christ.
What saved that marriage was their relationship with Jesus, the practice of grace in one of the most difficult situations. And that's why it's so important for us to have a relationship with Jesus. So important for us to teach that to our children. I always remind young couples when they get ready to get married, I say, spend a couple hours planning your ceremony and then spend about 20 hours learning the principles of having a great relationship. Relationships are hard because we're people broken by sin. But God's grace is available to anyone. And maybe you've walked in here today and you're like, there's no way God can forgive my sin. Let me remind you and remind us all that your sin cannot outdo God's grace. You're not that powerful. And if you're here today and like you feel like your marriage is in crisis and you're looking for help, it begins with asking God for help. And there's no shame in asking God for help. Or maybe you've walked in here and you feel just devastated by the shame and the guilt from the pornography, or the hidden gambling, or the hidden addiction, whatever hidden sin, someone did something to you, sexually abused you when you were a child, you've been carrying around that pain, and like what happened to Lisa, carrying around that pain for so long, thinking you're some second-class citizen in God's kingdom. God's grace is greater than that shame. So I'm inviting anyone who would like to come to the Next Step room or come forward and just pray. We'd love for you to make the first step, the next step, in finding healing and hope in Christ. Let's stand and worship.
Thank you for joining us today. If you feel like God spoke to you today and you would like to discuss your next right step with God, please visit cornerstonechatham.org, scroll to the bottom of the homepage, and fill out the form to connect with us. We hope you enjoyed being with us today, and we look forward to seeing how God is working around Cornerstone in person and online.